Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast brought to you by Bangalore International Centre, where we present conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
The Gift That Keeps On Giving is a 5-part series on the life and work of poet and scholar of Indian literature and linguistics, AK Ramanujan. Episode 4, The Poet. Arshia and Guillermo will now recite a selection of Ramanujan's poems from the collections The Striders and The Second Sight.
So I love Highway Stripper because it's so American. You know, it's the road trip, it's the loneliness of the road trip. The road is a great American symbol of hope. You know, anything can happen. You're going to a new life. So all of that, I think, is combined in this poem, especially in the last verse. So I'm going to read it now, right? Highway Stripper by AK Ramanujan. Once, as I was traveling on a highway to Mexico, behind a battered, once blue Mustang with a dusty rear window, the wind really sang for me, when suddenly, out of the side of the speeding car in front of me, a woman's hand with a wristwatch on it threw away a series of whirling objects onto the hurtling road. A straw hat, a white shoe fit to be a fetish, then another, a heavy pleated skirt, and a fluttery slip, faded pink, frayed lace edge and all. I even heard it swish. A leg of mutton blouse, just as fluttery. And as I stepped on the gas and my car lunged into the 50 feet between me and them, a rather ordinary, used, and off-white bra for smallish breasts whirled off the window and stuck a farmer's barbed wire with yellow-green wheatgrass beyond and spread-eagled on it, pinned by the blowing wind. Then, before I knew, bright red panties laced with white hit my windshield and I flinched. I swerved, but then it was gone, swept aside before I straightened up. Fortunately, no one else on the road. Excited, curious to see the stripper on the highway, maybe with an urgent lover's one free hand, or were there more, on her breast or thigh. I stepped again on the gas, frustrated by that dusty rear window at 50 feet. I passed them at 70. In that absolute second, the glimpse and the after-image in this hell of voyeurs, I saw only one at the wheel, a man, about 40. A spectacled profile looking only at the road beyond the nose of his Mustang with a football radio on. Again and again, I looked in my rearview mirror as I steadied my pace against the circling trees, but there was only a man. Had he stripped off not only hat and blouse, shoes and panties and bra? Had he shed maybe even the woman he was wearing? Or was it me, molting, shedding vestiges, old investments, rushing forever towards a perfect coupling with a naked nothing in a world without places? This is the fantasy Ramanujan. I cannot imagine Raman driving a car, following a dusty blue Mustang on a desert road in Arizona or anywhere. There was something very urban about Ramanujan in Chicago. Obviously, it was very different when he was here in India, but he was very much a man of the city streets, you know. not a poet of nature, not somebody who spoke of big blue skies or anything. It's a very gritty urbanism. It's also very American, 50s, 60s, beat kind of stuff. So that's why I think also I like this poem, because I think this is Ramanujan's fantasy, that he would be driving. When you go to America, this is everybody's fantasy, that you just step on the gas and drive for hundreds of miles without seeing anybody else. And when you see somebody like this, or you see suggestions of somebody, that person is wrapped up in mystery, and that person holds out promise, like America herself, And I think what he's able to do in this poem is he's able to break the male gaze. When he overtakes, he sees that there's a man, and he says, oh my God, are these his clothes? Did he shed the woman that he was wearing? Or is it me? So he fractures the male gaze at the end. And that's very powerful, I think. Otherwise, it's just some guy having a fantasy about a naked woman, So. But I think that last verse, why it's him that's doing the shedding, is because there's a verse gap. So you know that the thought is changing. It doesn't run on, so it's not he who's being shed. I mean, the clues of how to read the poem or where to break all of that is in the layout on the page. So in that sense, perhaps one does need to see a poem on a page, yeah. And Raman says strider is the New England name for the water insect in this poem. So, the striders. And search for certain thin-stemmed, bubble-eyed water bugs. See them perch on dry capillary legs, weightless on the rippled skin of a stream. No, not only prophets walk on water. This bug sits on a landslide of lights and drowns eye deep into its tiny strip of sky.
So here, again, it's a mirror image, this insect floating on water. And when, as the yogis say, it's the metaphor of the brain, no? If there are no ripples, I mean, it's the self, the insect is the self. You have the first part in the poem is like objective, like in a haiku, where everything's still, you meditate, subject and object are one, you're one with the object, you're there, you're connecting. And then the second part becomes philosophical, which means the brain turns inward. So he's doing with the shape of the poem, he's doing exactly what he's trying to say. So he brings in the word prophet. First part of the poem, he uses infinitive, which is timeless. All the verbs are infinitive. And he wants to look, see, he says see, imperative and infinitive. See them perch, weightless, on the rippled skin of a stream. Stream, it's a bit of the stream, it's a stream of consciousness also. And he says search, he starts saying, and search for yourself. So first part, subject and object are one. You're meditating, the insect is there, you have a clear-cut image. Second part, you become reflective. You look in the mirror, you see your face. You see your it's like the prophet walking on water. And was it Peter? He just loses faith and he drowns. So Jesus can walk, he can't walk. There's of course this idea there in the background as well. But this is just maybe the third or fourth layer of the meaning. And yeah, so the bug sits on a landslide of light and drowns, eye deep. But actually what's happening is the bug is an insect. He won't drown. It's us who drowns. It's me who drowns, the reader, because we start thinking about what he's trying to say. But the insect is actually flying into the sky. The sky is reflected in the water, so it's the same thing. It's a mirror image. Anyway, food for thought. The reader can go on looking at himself in the mirror and reading the poem again.
For me, extremely powerful, imagistic poem. It's called Still Life. When she left me after lunch, I read for a while, but I suddenly wanted to look again and I saw the half-eaten sandwich, bread, lettuce and salami, all carrying the shape of her bite. That it's not that the sandwich is bitten, it's her bite. It's a super sexy poem, actually. Routine day sonnet. For me, a perfectly ordinary day at the office. Only a red lorry passed the window at 2. A sailor with a chest tattoo. A walk before dark with my daughter to mark another cross on the papaya tree. Dinner, coffee, bedtime story. Of dog, bone and shadow. A bullock cart in an Eskimo dream. But I awake with a start to hear my wife cry her heart out as if from a crater in hell. She hates me. I hate her. I'm a filthy rat and a satyr.
Sangam literature comprises some of the earliest writings in Tamil, dating from the 1st to the 4th century CE. Vivek Shanbag and Karuna Sagari V will now recite from AK Ramanujan's 1967 anthology, The Interior Landscape.
ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಇದು ಕಾಡು ಮರಗಳ ಮಧ್ಯ ಮನೆ, ಸಿಮೆಂಟು ಬಿರುಕಿನ ಹುಲ್ಲು, ಅಮೆರಿಕನ್ ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಹಚ್ಚಿಗೆ ಕೊಯ್ದ ಕೊತ್ತಂಬರಿ ಸೊಪ್ಪು. He was a master of juxtaposing different images. You can see it in all through his writing in Kannada, in his novel as well as in his, especially in his poems. And if you think of the time when those collections were published, the first was called Hokkulalli Hoovilla, and then Mattu Itara Padyagalu, and then later on, the Kuntobille. He was ahead of his time in that sense. His first English writing that I read was The Interior Landscape. There is an afterword that he has written for these translations of Tamil poems. I think it was published sometime in mid-60s or late 67, I think. And I felt that was, even now I think that's outstanding, that introduction. Because till then, I did not have an entry into literatures of other Indian languages in the way Ramanujan sees it. See, we all I grew up reading many translations into Kannada from all neighboring languages, including Bangla, including Hindi, including, and in those days the translations were plenty. Today at least, we don't see that many translations coming into Kannada, but those days there were enough translations into Kannada. But the way Ramanujan put this thing across, these poems, because the critical view through which you look at this fiction, through which you look at these love poems, it was completely different. And I was thrilled to see it this way. And it is so interesting because Tamil is a neighboring language and we already have so many works translated into Kannada. And we knew about what the poetry of Sangam poetry or whatever that he has translated we knew about that poetry, but we had not seen it from these eyes. So I was very thrilled to see that afterword to that book, Interior Landscape, and which made me go after his other essays in English. And as I said, he has written these essays only in English. And I enjoy and I greatly admire his essays in English.
I would also like to read another part of his afterword to his Interior Landscapes. And that one is what he speaks about the work of the ancient Tamils, which is the Sangam work. And I'd like to read this because it's just the brilliance of bringing the essence of these classical Tamil poems, as well as his very nuanced interpretation of these poems. So let me just read out this paragraph for you. In their antiquity and in their contemporaneity, there is not much else in any Indian literature equal to these quiet and dramatic Tamil poems. In their values and stances, they represent a mature classical poetry. Passion is balanced by courtesy, transparency by ironies and nuances of design, impersonality by vivid detail, leanness of line by richness of implication. These poems are not just the earliest evidence of the Tamil genius. Tamils in all their 2000 years of literary effort wrote nothing better. I think this really brings out not only the translator in him, but his ability to use words to really explain a people, explain a culture, explain a language, you know? So these are my favorite bits from his writing. I, first of all, as an artist, I wouldn't really speak for the world of literature, though I do love poetry. But I think the seriousness of pursuit towards Tamil literature, and especially literature which preceded, the 5th century, the serious academic standing that he could build around that literature and the way that literature was read after that is to be mentioned. It's remarkable because it became a serious academic pursuit to read these poetry, which was not the case when he was in Chicago University, because Indology did mean more of Sanskrit and Tamil maybe, but that too medieval Tamil literature, which was very prevalent because it was sung. When you had the Bhakti poets, you could sing it. So it was part of a living tradition in temples. But the Sangam poems, unlike the medieval Tamil literature, was not something which was part of ritual or which was part of daily life. It was for the connoisseurs. It was not for just prayer, or it was not part of community activities or anything. So one had to deal with the classical texts because they want to read and engage with poetry. And to make that a serious academic pursuit, I think he was one of the pioneers. So this is from Kurundogai, number 203, by Nedum Palliyathanar. What she said about her unfaithful estranged husband. Malayidaitta nattarum mallar, he is not from some country beyond the hills. Marandalai tondra oorarum mallar, or from a town so far you can't see the trees. Kannir kana nannu vali irundum, he lives so near, I can't help but see him. Kadavul nanniya palor pola, yet he acts distant, like some holy sect close only to a god. Uri urugum yendeikku pariyalen manyan, pandur kale. There was a time when I was close to him. So, this poem, of course, is from the Marudam landscape, which is, infidelity, estrangement, and all of these things. And for me, this stands out for two reasons, because it's speaking about distance when two people are in the same house. And what intrigued me further was that this is a very contemporary theme of estrangement between couples. So from this, I understood that it is a long marriage, probably, and they've been together for a long time. And he is not a person who travels, and she has fond memories. All of this comes together in this poem. And actually what it suggests to me is that it's a contemporary midlife crisis. And without bringing this idea of contemporary midlife crisis, he has conveyed this through a translation. It's very, very special for me. And I had the fortune of also putting it into music and dancing it. And it really opens up a domestic world as well as this whole cycle of things taken for granted, of change, of age, of separation, and so on. So very special for me.
I took the poem Snakes, which is the second poem in the Striders collection. It's a 1966 collection. It's a very interesting poem because it kind of plays with, it's circular in it. You read it and you have to start reading it again. It's playing with the reader. So it took like 50 pages to do the stylistic analysis of the poem, which is what I learned in Edinburgh, analyzing how he plays with words and the placement of words in the lines and how the meaning is placed in the form. The form is the meaning, as Ramanujan said. Like most of the structuralists said, the way you play with the shape of words, the poem, and all the layers of what formalists call the form is the meaning. So the other 50 pages was about the inner meaning. I played also around the concept of the Akam and Puram, the inner and outer forms. So I explained what he was trying to say with the poem, as it's not just words, but the layers behind it and the concept behind the whole poem. So there I was just getting obsessed with this poem, and it's like, spent months with this poetry. There's this beautiful phrase, I'm going to read it. I think it's much better through his own words to explain what his material was like. I think the underlying current of his entire work is poetry and the way he plays with words. So there's this phrase I found, which I really like. It's also the opening epigraph in my book, When Mirrors Are Windows, a view of AK Ramanujan's Poetics. It goes like this. It says, poetry contains, transforms, and returns our reality to us and us to reality in oblique ways. I repeat, poetry contains, transforms, and returns our reality to us and us to reality in oblique ways. I think this kind of sums up his poetics. When people ask me what are some of the key words that appear in Ramanujan, one such metaphor which comes up in his poetry is glass, windows, mirrors. He was interested in understanding the self and how multiplicity of what we are multiple selves, and I think he saw himself as a multiple Ramanujan also. So poetry is, of course, words, it's content that shows us what we are and what we are not. Light, he said, when it hits on glass, it refracts and reflects. It does both things. You can see through and you see part of your own image. And it never comes through straight, but it's oblique. A little bit like in Sanskrit, you have this vakrokti concept of obliqueness. Because after all, poetry is life. Life is poetry. And as Ramanujan said, all of us are poets in some way or another. When we get witty and something comes up, he said it's an ordinary mystery. It's a mystery. It's what we all do. But it's just some poets have the ability to turn it into beauty and something that just rings a bell, like a sitar. And when you play the sitar, the strings, he said, I like to play with all the the other chords that you play in the sitar, the sympathetic chords, the strings, with all the tradition that's behind. And the more layers you have, the more strings. So if you look at his poetry, it's about very simple things, very ordinary things. It's just that poets are very good at that. They know how to put it in words. And it is always something which has to baffle you. If it doesn't baffle you, if it doesn't strike you, if it's just straightforward and not oblique, then it's not poetry. So he says that in his own poems. The idea of reflection, refraction is basic to Ramanujan's understanding of literature. There's this beautiful poem, essay also called Where Mirrors Are Windows. And I've taken the title from there, I changed it to When Mirrors Are Windows. Where Mirrors Are Windows is on Indian literature. He classifies different bodies of literature into self-reflexive and reflexive, how texts speak to each other. And then I was encouraged to do this book on Soma because I had already fished out some of those poems which had not been published, and he also had intended to publish them. I thought, well, maybe this is a way of doing a trilogy on AK Ramanujan, and I just finished my work as a scholar on him by doing this last homage to his unpublished work, which is very different. The Soma experience is based on we think that the concrete seed of the whole idea that he's trying to express there comes from his experience with mescaline in 1971, where he experiences trying to emulate, in a way, Aldous Huxley and others, but not exactly the same way. So he was concerned about where inspiration comes from. Is it possible that it's coming from an outer source? In this case, an elixir. Soma is also God, so he plays with that idea. But it's all really about comparing what ordinary poets are with the way we want to demystify the whole idea of what a poet is. His process has always been, and that's why he uses irony, to demystify the mystical process. He was envious of the Sangam poets and the mystic poets because they were masters in what they were doing. He couldn't do it. He was not a mystic. He wanted to demystify. He said we were ordinary people. He wanted to prove that, well, he didn't want to prove anything. He just wrote about it. I was kind of encouraged to do this third book, which is coming out now. It's just been published on Soma and with contextualized essays. I may just take a break now and not write any other book on Ramanujan, but people start asking me for contributions and articles. In the Sangam poems also, you have this technique, ulurai, which is the way you have, Hopkins called it an inscape. You explain a scene and you go into the whole essence of a particular quality of a person by just circumventing it. So it is just circumventing, going into a character which he makes up, but he's talking about himself. So it's like extension of himself. It's a metonymy. I think that's the other key word for Ramanujan. I would say, rather than metaphor, which of course is important, as a translation, you have to use metaphors in poetry, and all of a piece of translation is perhaps a metaphor. But metonymy, synecdoche, and metonymy, what's within, which is contiguous, contiguity, what is continuous of the self. And I think that's what he meant, in a way, to experience your other self by making a character of it, and to some extent also what you experience perhaps in a different state of consciousness, if you're inspired, or if you, in that particular case with the masculine experience, if you take a substance, psychedelic or psychotropic substance, it's an extension of yourself, what you experience there through your senses, and you can have an out-of-body experience even if you have mystical experience, or he was very interested in all these things. And I'm not surprised he wrote about these things, because also the Latin American and Borges have very much of that tradition, not just Borges, but also the shamanic tradition.
S.G. Vasudev takes us through the story of his long-standing collaboration with AK Ramanujan.
He had a very beautiful vision, and I realized his interest in serious art only when I went to Chicago. I spent some 4 days there. He was in some other place and he was divorced at that time, and I knew his wife also very well. So he said, "You must stay there." So I went and stayed with her. He came and stayed there for 4 days. Every day we were going for international exhibition of paintings and sculptures. It was a fantastic thing. And he would stand in front of a painting and would talk about the painting. I had not heard him that way at all in India, though he liked my work and he took a lot of things perhaps from art to build his poetry. I don't know. And I personally feel that he was interested in art visually, and because I felt that it was much easier for me to relate myself to some of the poems which he wrote. Most of the poems which he wrote. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult for me to visualize them. Brahma Jnana, it's called, in Kannada. There was a reading of his poems at Karnad's place. Karnad would invite me also, Ramanujan and Karnad. And then I went and he said, "I can't read this poem, just see it." I said, "That's fantastic." It's called, in Kannada we call it Lagu Lagu Guru, Guru Lagu Lagu that. So I could compose some of those poems into picture. I signed at the end of it Ramanujan, Vasudev, because it was both of us were involved in that. He said that I have got a Kannada collection of poems called Hokkolali Huvilla. So do you think you can do the cover design for it? I said, okay. I did. And it was on a grey, white lines on grey paper. And then the next one also, I think 2-3 years later, he asked me to do another cover design, which I did. The last one was in 1990, which was a cover design for Kannada collection again. And I had used only yellow, orange on the cover with white letters. When I met him in Chicago, he said, "Vasudev, nowadays cover pages are all very colorful. Why didn't you use like that?" I told him, "Ramanujan, your character of the poem doesn't need color. It is sheer black and white. You choose the word such a way that it becomes black and white. So I couldn't think of any other color for your, particularly cover designs." He accepted it. Whenever he used to come to India, he used to make it a point to visit me. He would come home to my Bangalore studio and say that, I want to go to Chennai. I said, "Okay, we'll go." I used to drive the car, but that time I couldn't go. So I wrote to one of my friends, told her that Ramanujan is coming to Chennai. He wants to go to Mahabalipuram. So she and her husband, I don't know whether you have heard of Shanta and Guhan. So they had taken him to Mahabalipuram. On the way, Tiruvadandai, the place, a village, a very famous village, is where they had built a house, farmhouse. They took him there, and then he said, "This place has got Tirumangai Alvar has spoken about this Tiruvadandai." And then they were very excited. They said, "Do you think you can get Tirumangai Alvar's poems?" So next year he came home here. He said, "I want to go and meet Shanta and Guhan because I want to recite this Tirumangai Alvar's poems. 10 poems I have translated." So he went, we all went, and he sat in their house and recited these 10 poems. These are all recorded, and it's, I think, Pratibha Nandakumar has got a recording of that, 10 poems. There are a lot of artists who do the cover designs. They illustrate it. I don't illustrate them. I take the essence of it and then do it, whatever it is. Even the poetry which I've done, drawings on Ramanujan's poem, they're not illustrations. Excepting one, there are no illustrations. I find beauty in writing Kannada alphabets. Kannada alphabets are very beautiful. I mean, any alphabet is beautiful, but Kannada, because I know the language, I know it's so beautiful. So I use the Kannada language in some of the poems, some of the illustrations, some of the cover designs, it goes very well. It beautifully it goes. I don't illustrate for the sake of illustration. Many people do that illustration, which I don't like very much. The cover design it's not necessary that it should show what you are seeing, what you are reading inside. Cover design has to be like a painting. It has to have its own strength. Of course, it should have something to do with the manuscript, but it should have a strength of its own. I strongly believe in it. I believe in who does the cover design. I know some of the artist friends of mine who do the cover designs regularly. They make money out of cover designs. But I don't bother about that. I sometimes read the stories inside because it is written by somebody whom I respect a lot as a writer. But I don't think cover matters to me there. But for me, when I do the cover, it matters. For me, it is an important thing to have a meaningful cover. It should have a strength of its own.
Now let me read how he played with his own translations and sometimes embedded his own poems with the translation. So I'm going to bring this out from the Soma collection, where he's using this very ironic kind of language and very experimental. The Soma poems are experiments. I mean, they're not finished poems, except a few of them which he then actually did publish in Second Sight. The rest he just dropped, he threw them away. This was in 1982 when he was still thinking of writing this whole collection under that title. So here is a poem where, again, he plays with the mythological Soma and with the different meanings. It's called the Jazz Poem for Soma. Jazz also because, jazz is free-spirited. In jazz, you have a structure, but you just play around with rhythms and notes. And it's kind of jazzy. Jazz Poem for Soma. Soma, why talk of Soma? Soma is no Vishnu, no Shiva. More like you, or even me. No lotus, no water can wet. No third eye, no Lakshmi, for all his fame. He can churn no sea, turn no mountain, burn no forest. Only lurk in, work on, lies, eyes, ears, and the rest of your 24 senses. Then every pore, hair, cell, and muscle, a body of pleasure with a vein of pain, a sack of smell, skunk, civet cat, grandma's unpicked, woods that burn and bloom, and other such bearers of myrrh and frankincense. Then jails have icicle rose, crystal carrots, slum for sepias have April tongues. The great ladder now has run, and my world, my mongoloid baby, has wedding rings on all her 10 fingers, and on her 13 perfect toes. Soma has no mimic similar, no similitude, grows ordinary as mystery, ancient familiar, the always here. Soma is the same as you and you and you. When you make the right mistake, fall to the ground and find your attitude. So, poet, beware. Now this last line, poets beware, is the first two lines of the translation from Namalvar, which he was working on at the time. And it's a translation that begins the Hymns for the Drowning 1981 collection, which he places there at the end. And that poem goes like this. Poets, beware, your life is in danger. The Lord of Gardens is a thief, a cheat, master of illusions. He came to me, a wizard with words, sneaked into my body, my breath. With bystanders looking on, but seeing nothing. He consumed me, life and limb, and filled me, made me over into himself.
I don't know. The Ramanujan was atheist or non believer. I had never asked him about that. But his Sangam poetry, I think he was more interested in translation, powerful translation from one language to another language. He knew Tamil, so he could do it. Later on, before his death, he had done something in Telugu to English also. So he tried to learn the language. So he used to come to Chennai regularly to learn good Tamil, and so that he could read this good Tamil. For example, Sangam, or it's a very good Tamil, old Tamil, and also Alvar's poems, all in Tamil. But his translations were fantastic. And he believed in words, translations. I don't know whether he believed in God. I have no idea.
This series was conceived by Lekha Naidu with sound recording, music and post-production by Ishan Gupta and Gaurav Krishna. We would like to acknowledge the generous contributions of Ashia Sattar, Guillermo Rodriguez, Karuna Sagari V, S.G. Vasudev and Vivek Shanbag. This is your host, Madhurya Balan, signing off.